I was imprisoned for 15 years without knowing why. When I was finally released, I thought I would find freedom. But the truth waiting for me outside was far more terrifying than the years I spent locked away. In 1988, I was arrested for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. It was my daughter's birthday, and after my friend Joe Juan bailed me out, I called her to tell her to wait for me. But before I could get home, I was taken. Suddenly, I found myself locked in a windowless hotel room, clueless about why or who had abducted me. I was fed through a trapdoor, gassed whenever they needed to cut my hair, change my clothes, or clean the room. The only glimpse I had of the outside world was through the TV. Then, one day, I saw the news. My wife, Kim Ji-yoon, had been killed, and the evidence pointed to me, my blood, my fingerprints. That's why I became a prime suspect. As the months passed, and later years, I began hallucinating. My mind unraveled further, and I tried to take my own life more than once, but each time, they revived me. Desperation consumed me, and I started keeping a journal, listing everyone who might hold a grudge against me. I also trained. My fists would become my only weapon. 6 years in, I began digging, a single metal chopstick my tool. Brick by brick, I created a small hole, enough to feel the rain outside. My escape was near, or so I thought. But before I could hide the hole, they gassed me once again. When I woke, a woman was there, hypnotizing me. After 15 years, I was finally released, not as the man I had been, but as something else. Emerging from a piece of luggage, I found myself outside, disoriented, dressed in a new suit, my old journals by my side. That's when I saw him, a man on a ledge, clutching his dog. He told me not to stop him from jumping. It was the first human contact I'd had in years, and I didn't care. I took his hand, feeling it against my face, and smiled. He asked me, even though I'm no better than a beast, don't I have the right to live? I repeated the question, a strange satisfaction washing over me. Just as he was about to fall, I grabbed his necktie, urging him to hear my story first. After telling him, I walked away, ignoring his plea. Behind me, he fell, crashing onto a car below. I wandered the city, trying to decide my next move. Contacting my family or friends was out of the question. I was still wanted for my wife's murder. In the streets, I tested my newfound strength on a group of young men, and to my surprise, I beat them all. Soon after, as I sat in front of a seafood restaurant, a homeless man handed me a phone and a wallet full of money. He warned me not to ask any questions because he didn't know anything. I inspected the wallet and entered a sushi bar, ordering something alive to eat. The waitress brought me a live octopus, and I devoured it, raw and wriggling. But as soon as I finished, I collapsed. When I woke, I was in the waitress's apartment, recovering from a fever. Her name was Mito. She had taken care of me, but I couldn't trust her. I remembered the call I received at the sushi bar. The voice on the other end taunted me, asking if I liked the suit, demanding I reflect on my past. Who was this man, and why had he done this to me? I was determined to find him. As I recovered in Mito's apartment, she told me she was interested in me, but she wasn't ready for anything physical. I didn't trust her, not yet. Despite her kindness, I felt trapped in the larger game my captor had created. I needed to find my daughter. With Mito's help, we discovered that she had been adopted by a couple from Sweden. Knowing this gave me some relief, but the distance and the passage of time had turned her into a stranger. I realized I had to let go of her and focus on the man who had imprisoned me. This was my true mission now. One day, Mito received an online message from someone using the ID Evergreen. The message referenced the Count of Monte Cristo, and it piqued my interest. When I moved closer, Evergreen taunted me directly, asking how I was adjusting to the bigger prison. Mito admitted she had been chatting with him for a while, mostly about sushi. I felt the walls closing in. Could I trust her? Was she part of the conspiracy? I decided to work alone. I retraced my steps and discovered the restaurant that had delivered food to my cell for years. I followed a delivery man to the building where I had been incarcerated. Inside, I attacked a guard with a hammer, driven by the fury of 15 stolen years. I uncovered the truth. This was no ordinary prison but a criminal operation that specialized in imprisoning people for a price. I tortured the man running the place, Mr. Park, pulling out his teeth with the claws of my hammer, until he finally revealed a recorded phone call with my captor. I took the recording and tried to leave, but a horde of men stood between me and freedom. Armed only with my hammer and my fists, I fought them off. It was a brutal struggle, bloody, relentless. They stabbed me, but I kept going. When I finally escaped, barely holding on, I collapsed on the street. A man appeared, helping me into a taxi. He gave the driver an address and then, chillingly, revealed that he was the one who had locked me up. I was too weak to resist, so I watched in silence as the car drove off. Back at home, I listened to the recording from Mr. Park's office. It confirmed what I already knew. My imprisonment had been long and methodical, filled with drugs to keep me controlled. But what stung the most was the reason I had been targeted. "He talks too much," my captor had said on the recording, but that couldn't be all there was to it. The next day, I went to see Joe Juan, my old friend. I needed his help to identify the voice on the recording. Unfortunately, he couldn't recognize it. However, Joe Juan helped me trace the online ID Evergreen. I stumbled back into Mito's apartment, my mind spiraling with suspicion. I didn't want to believe it, but something inside me needed to know the truth. As I tried to get answers from her. Then my phone rang. It was Joe Juan. He had found Evergreen's real name, Wu Jin, and he was just across the street. When I reached Wu Jin's place, I came face to face with him and his shadow of a bodyguard, Mr. Han. Wu Jin had that twisted calmness about him, like he knew something I didn't, something I could never prepare for. He told me, straight to my face, that I had 5 days to figure out why he locked me up. If I didn't, Mito would die. And if I did, he promised to end it all, his own life. I wanted to end him right then and there. My blood was boiling, but Han stepped in. Wu Jin was untouchable. He just smiled at me, told me I'd never know the truth if I killed him. Then, with that same eerie calm, he revealed that he had a pacemaker, a tiny button he could press at any moment to stop his heart. He was always in control, even of his own death. As he turned to leave, he reminded me of something that made my heart sink, Mito. I had left her tied up, vulnerable, with the door open. And her scream, that scream cut through the fog in my mind like a knife. I raced back to her. When I got there, Mr. Park and his thugs were already on her. They overpowered me easily, slammed me down, and I felt the cold press of a hammer against my teeth. Park was going to rip them out, one by one. But then, a phone call. Mr. Han showed up like some twisted savior, offering Park a briefcase full of money. He took it. They left me beaten but alive. I grabbed Mito, swearing vengeance on Park, telling him I'd take his hand if I ever saw him again. We fled. It was all I could think to do. We made it to a motel. I was exhausted, but Mito, she started singing. A strange, soft song that felt like an invitation. And before I knew it, we were in each other's arms. But the nightmare never ended. After we fell asleep, gas filled the room. When I woke up, there was a package, a severed hand. Mr. Park's hand. Wu Jin's message was clear. He was watching us, listening to every move. Later, Mito and I stopped by Joe Juan's internet cafe to dig deeper into Evergreen. As Mito browsed through the search results, Joe Juan and I realized that Evergreen was the name of our high school batch. We hurried to the school, found the yearbook from 1979, and discovered Li Wu Jin's name. I called Joe Juan, asking if he remembered Wu Jin, but he didn't. When I mentioned Sui, he paused before telling me that she had died after I transferred. His words felt like ice running down my spine. I needed more. I needed to know why. Tell me everything you remember about Sui, I pressed, my grip tightening on the phone. Joe Juan hesitated again, and then he finally spoke. She had a bit of a reputation. People talked. She was very promiscuous. His words hung in the air, heavy and tainted with unspoken secrets. Then, the real horror unfolded. Wu Jin had been listening in on our call. Enraged by Jo Hwan's words about his sister, he murdered him while I was still on the line. That's when I realized the depth of Wu Jin's hatred. Sue was his sister, and something connected her to the nightmare I was living. I tracked down Mr. Park again, desperate for more information. His missing hand made him more cooperative, and he revealed that I had been drugged to make me susceptible to hypnosis during my imprisonment. He also promised to protect Mito while I went after Wu Jin. I was getting closer to the truth, but the price was rising, and the guilt was consuming me. Memories started to flood back. I had accidentally witnessed Wu Jin and Sue in an intimate moment back in high school. I didn't understand it at the time, but what I saw was far more damaging than I could have ever known. I had told Jo Hwan about it before I transferred schools, and that rumor spread like wildfire. It was this moment that had sealed my fate. With these painful memories returning, I knew exactly where Wu Jin was hiding. I found him and confronted him, accusing him of using hypnosis to make me forget the incident. But Wu Jin scoffed. He didn't need hypnosis, I had simply forgotten on my own. He revealed that Sue, tormented by rumors of her pregnancy, had spiraled into despair. Eventually, she believed the lie herself. Wu Jin had blamed me for Sue's death all these years. But when I accused him of killing her to cover up their relationship, he coldly dismissed my accusations. Instead, he proudly recounted how he orchestrated every detail of my suffering. He had even manipulated Mito into my life through hypnosis, turning her into part of his twisted revenge. And then the final blow. Wu Jin showed me a photo album of Mito as a child, my daughter. I had been living with her, protecting her, and unknowingly falling in love with her. The horror of it all crashed down on me. Wu Jin had orchestrated the ultimate torment, he had taken everything from me, and now he had turned my love into a nightmare. Enraged, I attacked him, but Mr. Han, his bodyguard, stopped me. Even though I managed to injure Mr. Han, Wu Jin had the upper hand. And then, in a cold twist, Wu Jin decided to kill his own bodyguard, showing me just how far he was willing to go to complete his revenge. Now, I was at his mercy, broken beyond words. Wu Jin stood there, watching as I collapsed under the weight of my own despair. He had broken me, and he knew it. But he wasn't done. He still had one final card to play. He reminded me that Mr. Park was still working for him, and Mito was now in his hands. In Mr. Park's building, a gift box had been delivered to her. Inside it lay the final piece of this twisted puzzle. Wu Jin told me that if I didn't get to her in time, the truth would be revealed to her as well. I called Mito immediately, begging her not to open the box. I told her to wait for me, and with all the strength I had left, I rushed to her. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't about saving Mito. It was about saving what little was left of myself. I had to stop Wu Jin from completing his sick plan, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Desperation consumed me, and I fell to my knees before Wu Jin. I begged him, pleaded with him, not to reveal the truth to Mito. I had lost my wife, my freedom, and now my dignity. But I couldn't let Mito know what had been done to us. I couldn't bear the thought of her learning that she was my daughter, that we had been manipulated into this cruel, incestuous nightmare. So, I did the only thing I could think of to show Wu Jin my complete submission. I barked like a dog. I begged like a beast, hoping that this display of degradation would satisfy him. It didn't work. Wu Jin remained unmoved. I had one last option. In my final act of desperation, I took a pair of scissors and, without hesitation, cut out my own tongue. Blood poured from my mouth as I fell before him, wordlessly begging for his mercy. I had silenced myself, just as he had always wanted. No more words, no more truth, just the silence of my suffering. Finally, Wu Jin relented. He called Mr. Park and told him to keep the gift box closed. The truth would remain hidden, for now. Wu Jin walked away, leaving me a broken man, but not without one last token of his cruelty. He handed me a remote control and left, telling me that it controlled his pacemaker. If I wanted to end his life, all I had to do was press the button. I pressed it, but instead of stopping his heart, the remote played a recording, an audio of me and Mito, the moment we made love. Wu Jin had recorded it all, turning our intimacy into another layer of his twisted revenge. It was the final mockery. As Wu Jin entered the elevator, I watched him, still clutching my bleeding mouth. He began to recall the day his sister, Sue, had died. She had begged him to let her go, to free her from the weight of their shared shame. And just as the elevator doors opened, Wu Jin shot himself in the head. His revenge had been complete. There was nothing left for him now. I wrote a letter to the hypnotist, the one who had helped Wu Jin orchestrate this nightmare. I told her my story, pouring out the pain and guilt that now consumed me. I begged her to help me forget. I didn't want to live with the knowledge of what I had done, of what had been done to me and Mito. The hypnotist agreed, though she warned me that things might go wrong. The process could split my mind, creating two versions of me. One would forget the truth, live in ignorance, and be free to love Mito. The other would be the monster that knew everything, but that monster would walk away, aging a year with every step, until it eventually died. I agreed to the hypnosis, knowing it was my only chance at salvation. I needed to forget. I needed to be free. When I awoke, I was alone in the snow. Mito found me, wrapped her arms around me, and tried to warm me up. She told me she loved me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to smile. But as her words sank in, the smile turned to pain. I embraced her, knowing that the truth still lurked somewhere deep inside me, locked away by the hypnotist. I could never escape what had happened. Not truly. But in that moment, I chose to hold on to the lie. I chose to live with the version of myself that could love Mito, even if it meant living in ignorance. The monster that knew the truth would walk away, slowly dying with each step, as I clung to the only thing I had left, Mito's love. And so, my story ends, not with justice or peace, but with a lie. A lie I was willing to live with. Because even though I had become a beast, didn't I still have the right to live?